Alrighty. So as we said, it's going to be a chat today about the most impressive and the most disappointing clubs up to this point. But as longtime listeners of this pod know, we like to start off with a smile. So why don't we chat about the most impressive teams so far? And I'll send it over to Logan first. Logan, which team has stood out to you as one of the most impressive so far, based off of maybe what you were thinking they would be?
Yeah, so I think I'm going to follow in the same line as you, Andrew, and I think going with what is on your scarf, I think the Vancouver Whitecaps. I mean, you're looking at a team that I think many of us in MLS lore like to put them around eighth or ninth. It seems pretty fitting for this team. I don't know where you guys had them as far as preseason predictions, but Jordan and I are usually pretty rough on them, but I think we've had them a little higher this season just based off of some of the Western Conference teams and what they had lost. But I'd always been pretty high on Vancouver, just covering the team itself. I think that you look at an exciting team, a team that sits atop the West, which I mean, that's weird to say with Vancouver Whitecaps. But I mean, as far as, and I know we can get into some of the details, but just a really impressive resume so far. They have a new head coach and Jesper Sorensen, who I believe does a fantastic job stepping in after Vanni Sartini, who I really enjoyed. But watching the Whitecaps this year, I just felt like this is a team that finally looks like they're ready to take that next step in the Western Conference, and a Western Conference that I think has gotten much weaker this year. So, I mean, that's my first. I can kind of share the spotlight with some of you guys and talk a little bit about Vancouver, but that's who immediately jumps off the page, I think, for a lot of us. So,
Yeah, I'll just jump and piggyback right off of that because I went out and predicted that Vancouver were not only going to struggle, but we're going to be historically bad this year. Bottom of the West, no chance to even think about them. And what do they do with a new club or with a new manager, with all the uncertainty around the club, with a quiet transfer window, and the fact that after 4 years, somebody's going to figure out how to stop Brian White and Ryan Gauld, right? Somebody has to. So my prediction was they were going to be dead last in the West. And if I just check my notes here, top of the West, one league loss. They've knocked off not one but two Liga MX powerhouses on the road to a CCL semifinals, and they're playing some of the best football in their club's history. So you want to talk about podcast curse, Vancouver? You are so welcome.
They're gonna build a statue for you in
That's
Vancouver.
right. I'll send them. I'll send them a couple headshots. I can pick from their favorite.
Yeah, Logan had them sixth. I had them 12th. So I feel very like I was like, why are you firing your coach after he did like I don't know, he was a great character and everything, and I was just like I was puzzled by it. But I apologized this week on the podcast because it seems to have been the right move, and they are now, top of the West. Well, they finished that way. That's the question. But I mean, they're still balancing CCC as well, and they got through that round, and have a chance of maybe beating Miami and actually maybe taking the whole thing if they get to a final. They already knocked off like two Mexican clubs, so yeah, I mean, a big surprise for me.
Yeah, Jordan, why don't you just keep on running then? And do you have a different team? Do you have anything
Yeah,
else you want
I
to add
do.
there?
I
Yeah.
do. I have San Diego as
Ooh, I like it.
my surprise team, sticking with the West. I made the joke this week that the Western Conference kind of looks like it's turned upside down. Like, the teams on the top, which right now are like Vancouver, San Diego, Minnesota, Austin, Portland, Dallas, Colorado. I was not expecting, I would say, a good chunk of those to be near the top. But like San Diego is a new expansion club. And they start with 14 points against who we thought were really good teams. They had to face some pretty tough opponents. And while I can't kind of project on how they were, how they're doing based off of last season because they weren't around, but I just went back and looked at like all of the expansion teams that started playing since 2020. And this is, like the second best start for an expansion side since then because St. Louis obviously had 5 wins, 2 losses, 0 draws in what year was that? 2023. And then 2022, Charlotte had 3 wins, 4 losses. Austin did have a pretty good start in 2021 with 14 points as well, 4 wins, 2 draws, 1 loss. But then you look at like Nashville and Miami in 2020, both having like really bad starts. If you also include, MLS is back, thanks to the COVID year. But I don't know. I was kind of down on San Diego going into the season. I felt like they didn't really do enough. They had some big names come over, but I feel like with expansion clubs, this is where it's always a wrinkle when you're trying to predict stuff before the season because you have no clue how they're actually going to come out and do, right? Like you can look at some of those moves like, De La Torre coming over and Lozano coming over, and you're like, great, how will they actually do as a team? How will they, it's one of those tough things to predict, and they've come out and just been really, really sharp. Now, of course, I've mentioned this a few times too. They've started against what we thought was a gauntlet. Like if you look at the preseason and you look at who they had to go against, you'd be like, man, 14 points after that, San Diego is really good. Some of those teams, though, have had that disappointing start that we're going to get to that I'm like, I don't know how much this is still like, is it San Diego's this good or is it that these teams are so disappointing when you're looking at teams like Galaxy, LAFC, and, Seattle and stuff that they're beating. But I'm sure San Diego fans don't care. They're probably happy with 14 points near the top of the West, 7 games in.
Yeah, that's a great shout, right? And I think it's such an interesting part about MLS in general is that if Man City starts off with, 3 losses out of 5, you're like, oh, Man City's not performing well. If LAFC or Galaxy start off with 3 out of 5, it's like, are they really not that good, or is this just a downslope? Like, what is the deal here, right? So it adds that little wrinkle in that I really love about. But Connor, your thoughts?
Well, this is why your favorite co-host here comes prepared to the podcast because I did have Vancouver and San Diego on my list, but I came with a third just in case this happened, and it's a good thing I did. I'm going to give a little bit of love to Austin FC, who was a team that I had predicted to finish 11th in the West, and still very much possible for that to be the case. But I'll tell you this, if you gave me 20 guesses of who was going to be the best defensive team at this point in the season, you may have even been able to give me 30 guesses. I don't think I'd get it right. I really did not think that Austin was going to be the best defensive team in the league. I mean, granted, it's only 7 games into the season, but 3 goals allowed in 7 games so far this season, never would have guessed that. I look at this defense on paper, never would have guessed it. But I think they're in a similar state to maybe a team we'll talk about later, so I'm not going to spoil it. You might be able to figure it out from the hints, but they're surprisingly very strong in the defense, like more so than I had thought originally. But the attack is still in the process of getting figured out. I think there's good promise for Austin though, because if they could keep up this defense to some extent, there's a lot of like big priced attacking talent in this team that I think is just kind of like taking some time to kind of get figured out, gel, get chemistry and all that stuff, figure out their best place on the field. Where if they get that stuff figured out, Austin could be a serious like threat in the Western Conference if they can keep up this defensive effort that they've put in so far. But it's been shocking to me. Honestly, I was not expecting this in the slightest.
I would agree. Austin is a team that we kind of consistently rag on, I feel like, on our show. And it is, we kind of talked about it like last week or 2 weeks ago. I forget when it was, of like, I looked at them as maybe an opportunity to discuss them on this, but I'm not sold on them just because of what you mentioned with the goals. Like they've only scored 5, given up 3, and I'm like, I can't see that staying. Like it's either going to be that they start scoring a lot more and they keep going well, or all of a sudden they're going to start giving up more goals where those draws and wins that they're winning like 1-0 are going to end up being like 0-0s or 1-0 losses, and they're going to end up getting further down the table. So I'm a little worried about them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would 100% agree with that. I think this is good for them now
Oh yeah.
because they had Vasquez come in who has MLS experience, but probably still like getting a little bit of time to kind of connect with the rest of the team and find his place there. And then you got Bukhari, another big money signing, Uzuni, also another big money sign. Like if those guys can gel and like, take this time now while the defense is like going sicko mode, they can kind of like figure it out. And then once the defense, inevitably probably starts to leak more goals, they could maybe start hitting in more goals to kind of offset it. And then maybe now we're looking at Austin in a much better spot because, this period where like Atlanta is going through right now,
Hmm.
they were doing in a much better spot and now can like make the most of that advantage.
Always better when you're in the top three than when you're not in the top three. So I agree with you in that case. And it's also, yeah, they're the only ones to beat the team that I brought, San Diego. So they have some like quality wins as well to their resume, but they just need to start scoring.
You guys hit it all on the head there. But Connor, sicko mode. What are we back in like 2016? Really throwing
I
it back
am.
there. Jeez. Listen, we've hit a lot of teams out in the Western Conference, but nobody's talking about the big splash in the East, even though we got their kit on screen right now. How have nobody brought up Philadelphia right now? Another team that sold off tons of players in the offseason, didn't reinvest at all, changed their head coach from somebody who is a perennial top 3, 4 guy, except for one season, to a guy who is as a Red Bull supporter who watched Bradley Carnell ball is hot and cold. He's either really, really good or he's really, really not. You didn't know what you're going to get out of there. And they're pushing for a supporter shield race early in the season. And, you know, are they going to stay there, right? We're talking about these teams that start hot. Are they going to stay there? You just lost your club's leading goal scorer for
Hmm.
$4 million to the Columbus Crew, who are top of the Eastern Conference, your own conference, and unbeaten. So you've made them stronger. But well, time will tell for that. But energy drink soccer from Carnell is really, really showing off right now. It's performing well. Baribeau's red hot. The kids are performing. And one of our listeners pointed out they're finally healthy again, right? They've got key pieces back that they didn't have last year, specifically Andre Blake in goal. But even with him being back in that conversation, again, I couldn't have taken 15 guesses and said, yeah, Philly might be punching top three, 25% of the way through the season. Wasn't on my bingo card. So I think it's really, really impressive. Now, I made the joke with a friend of mine that I think Ernst Tanner wants to play on like a super difficult mode. Like he was like, all right, I'm going to get rid of Jack McGlynn. I'm going to get rid of Jim Curtin, and I'm going to ship off Carranza midseason. We're going to run it back with a brand new coach. And then he started doing well. I was like, no, we got to take it up another level. Let's get Gazdag out of here. So this should be really interesting in the next couple of weeks. But Jordan, your thoughts on Philly?
I think if we had this podcast a couple weeks ago, they would be up there for me. I'm so down on them right now. Not even so much for the on the field stuff. It's mostly for the off the field stuff. It almost feels like scoring own goals. I've been a fan of the club since 2010 when they joined the league, and 2011, their first year in the playoffs, it was great. I went to that game against Houston, leg one, and Latu was like my favorite player. And literally after the season, they trade Latu, who at that point was like your all-time goal scorer. I mean, it's only been 2 seasons, but you're like, okay, he's somebody that the fans adored. And then you had the whole like Peter Nowak fallout that happened and whatever he was doing in the locker room and all that. But then, he gets shipped out. We get Jim Curtin, and then eventually we build to a really good quality team that is continuing to compete. And they even bring Latu back at a certain point, right? And I don't know it. Then you had all the goodwill. You get to a final in 2022 and then you just don't do anything with that momentum that you have. And since then, it's been a downward trajectory. I was really down on them going into the season because I was like, they fired Curtin, who I had wanted fired back in the day before he started going on his streak. Like when we were losing those Open Cups, I was definitely like, all right, get him out of here. But then we were starting to do well. I'm like, why are we firing him? And then it seemed like it was a good move. Carnell comes in and we're playing well, and then we're third in the East. And we're like, yeah, let's get rid of our all-time leading goal scorer guy. It just feels like flashbacks, and it's a bummer. And I understand like maybe the financial side of it is like Sugarman is not a big owner, but it really is like there's goodwill that they had that they are ruining with the fans uh consistently in the past year and a half. And it's really going to be tough if right now you are still competitive. You are third place in the East. You're only a few points off, and then you give your best goal scorer to the guys that are at the top of that table. And it just seems like now the gap is even wider. And Tanner today was like, we're not replacing him with anybody. We have good youth players right now. And I'm like, it just drives me mad. So we'll see how it goes. But I think I definitely maybe would have highlighted them a couple weeks ago, but now I'm just like severely, severely down. They almost became my most disappointing because of this stuff.
Man, I will tell you, last year as a Red Bull fan, we were sitting in fourth for so long, and like we were locked in for the playoffs. Like for the most part. And just the disdain around the fan base, like we suck, we can't win games. Like the vibe around the team is like this has got to be the most down bad team who's sitting in fourth place in the table of all time. And then Philadelphia's like, hold my beer, because watch
Yep.
what I'm about to do. And everybody in Philly is pissed. And you're sitting top of the table like 25% of the season. It's just so funny.
Yeah.